Just when you thought it was safe to watch videos again on the internet comes Tales from Someplace Besides the Garage.
Hey guys, I'm back, just because I haven't done a video for a while. Being at a kind of loss of what to talk about, I guess I could talk about my new album, but it's only out there in some places. I don't think it's available yet. It's on CD Baby, I know. I don't know that many people buy it necessarily from there. So I'll talk about this a little bit more once it hits everywhere. iTunes and wherever, Amazon and wherever people buy stuff from. But it's out there. And if you do go to CD Baby, as a matter of fact, I set it up so you could actually listen to the full album. Usually the tracks there are, just like on Amazon, these little 30-second to a minute excerpts of the individual pieces. But that's how I had them set up in the past. But is that really enough to give people an idea of what the music's about? I'm not sure. So this time, when I set up the new album, I set it up so the whole thing could be played and heard on CD Baby. Even though I don't get any remuneration for that. And it's probably more than likely going to actually be on YouTube, I'm guessing. I don't know how long that takes. It might take a month or two. But I guess through CD Baby, I don't put them up there. I don't actually put them up there, but it seems like I have a page. If you type in Gary Hayden topic, that's not created by me. That's created by YouTube, actually. And many, not all, but most of my albums are actually up on there to listen to in full. And of course, I always hope that if you do love them a lot, you will buy them in some form. Anyway, today I wanted to do another video because I kind of feel like there's a very small very small batch of people that do like my videos. And for me, I feel like I only really keep in touch with people in a lot of ways through doing these videos. I mean, I do have email exchanges, certainly, but for a lot of people, it's I think it's preferable to see somebody come on and talk, and you maybe feel a little bit more connected to them. And it's easier to leave comments too then, and I can respond back to them, type of thing. So I don't know. I've been at a bit of a loss of what to do videos about. I could just continue, because I never stop listening to music. I could always just continue to do like, oh, here's what I'm listening to this week or whatever. And I probably will come to that, as most of my older videos, which are in my history still, you can see I've already done on a lot of my favorite artists, where I've gone into great detail about the history of an artist, or my history of them, and their recorded legacy, that type of thing. So I've actually done a lot of the artists that I have followed for decades, and I know a lot about. So anything else I do could be repeating some of those artists, or somebody like that I love a lot of their recorded work. Not sure how I feel about him as a person, but somebody like Miles Davis is it's almost too much of a legacy. Even if I stop off at the point that I really didn't care for his music after Bitches Brew too much, and even if I stopped off there, there's more content there because of the number of albums he put out that I would end up having to do a multi-part video just to cover his music that I like up to, like, say, 1969. So I don't know if I want to do that. If people want to, if you're into Miles Davis, you probably already know this stuff and you don't need me to tell you. And if you're not into him, do you really need that kind of detail? I'm not sure. Or that amount of me talking. The one thing that I did, for some reason, just kind of reflect on, and this is something that, music fans, whether you're vinyl fans or whatever, CD fans, just music fans in general, probably can relate to. I was thinking back to the days that were a lot more prevalent and obvious, maybe, when I, excuse me, I shouldn't do a video right after I ate. My throat's all messed up. I was thinking about the good old, I've talked about them before, the good old record shop days. Now, for me personally, I'm not actually in love with going to record stores so much anymore, simply because my tastes are so esoteric that they're not going to have anything I want to buy for the most part. Unless I get a sudden desire to, I don't know, pick up something from my past, like my past when I was in high school and I used to listen to rock, but that's highly unlikely. So I think my allergies are starting to bother me. But I can't edit, so everything stays in. So thinking about one of the things that I did like about the physical shopping at record stores was the fact that you could go there when you weren't sure what you wanted to buy. It's one thing if you wanted to go pick up a specific album by a specific artist, and then it's a question of whether or not it's in stock, really. Or you want an album by a specific artist. But one of the things that I used to like to do when I was in the mood for an evening, I remember when I used to go to the Tower Records, which doesn't exist here anymore. At one point had one large store, and it got so big that they ended up moving, keeping the big main store, and moving into there was a smaller store next door, and they moved their classical section into this store next door, so you could park in the same parking lot, and, if you made a right out of your car, you went to the main Tower Records, which had the jazz and the pop music and the videos and stuff like that. If you hung a left, though, you went into a smaller building, but the smaller building was still this very large for just classical music. So it was much larger than the classical section was when it was in the main store. And a lot of times when I went to the record store, I'm always in the mood for new music, but I was in the mood to buy something I don't know, something that would surprise me. And I would go strictly on not necessarily the album cover art, but the album cover art would be something that would stop me and make me look at an album. I was looking for an atmosphere. I wanted to go home that evening, wait until the sun started going down, and put on some piece of music that I knew nothing about, where you're not listening to like a jazz band or a rock band or something with soloists or improvisation so much as you were listening to an atmosphere. To me, the classical music that I like, not all of it necessarily, but the classical music that I like kind of creates an atmosphere. Kind of mellow. It kind of creates it's a very visual for me type of music that you don't really need images for. But the imagery would always, to me, kind of start with the cover art. So if I put on anything with an orchestra, anything symphonic, a lot of times the jumping off point for the visual images that would come to mind when I was listening to the music would be the cover art. And then I just, as the music went on, because my imagination would kind of take me from wherever that starting point was. And I'll give you, for instance, here's a great album cover, right? So I bought this. Here's a symphony. This is orchestra music. I knew nothing about the composer. As a matter of fact, I still know nothing about the composer, apart from the brief notes that are in the CD booklet. And by the way, one of the good things about classical music is they generally, most of them, will give you a bit of a history about the composer, and generally about the pieces contained in there. So there's a little bit of a history lesson. But here's a great image of a wintry landscape. So I never even heard of Wilhelm Peterson Berger before I bought this, and I specifically chose this one. One of this is a great album cover. And it was orchestral music, so it wasn't so much listening to a soloist. It was listening to an orchestra, and I thought with a cover image like that, it's probably gonna have a great atmosphere to it, a great, I would say mood, because all music has one mood or another. But when I would buy these, I was specifically looking to create an atmosphere, and maybe one that's not created in in a lot of jazz music and things like that. You listen to jazz music differently. I tend to really focus in on what the individual players are doing. And I wouldn't say it becomes more of a technical exercise, but it's maybe closer to becoming a technical exercise listening to somebody play a saxophone or piano or something. And with classical music, I tend to become more of an uneducated listener in that I'm just laying back and letting the music kind of flow over me. And I'm not analyzing it. And a lot of what I buy doesn't necessarily feature a soloist where there's a raging violin part over an orchestra where you really focus in on the violin part and the technique behind it. I prefer the kind of orchestral thing when I'm listening to orchestral music. It's not the only type of classical music I listen to, but in this case, when I'm listening to orchestral music, I just want to hear the orchestra as one instrument so that I'm really hearing the music and trying a lot, maybe, not to necessarily hone in on just one specific instrument, like a cello or a flute or something like that. Sometimes you do that anyway. But so listening to something like this, knowing nothing about the history of the music, having no previous experience with it, which is good. I think, if I had heard this in 1967 or something, and I hadn't heard it since, I'd probably be thinking about that time period, 1967, a lot, and what was going on in my life at the time when I was listening to this. But when I picked this up, probably in the 90s, early 90s, I was pretty much just honing in on the experience of the music, the atmosphere it creates. Great that I had no previous history with it, never knew the composer or anything like that. So I've done that with a lot of classical music and things that I picked up. This is almost a total random selection of things, but all of these I really like a lot. I'd only heard of Grieg before. I didn't have any of his albums, and this is I'm pretty sure this is just solo piano, and this is pretty damn nice too. Yes, it is a solo instrument, so maybe you do tend to listen to the keyboard technique a little bit more, similar to what you do in jazz. But I try not to focus on that and to try to get to just experience the music. But these lyric pieces are really nice. Maybe not quite as laid back as like a Ravel piano piece, maybe, but in some cases it's almost there. And my problem with a lot of classical music is it is too busy. But this is particularly lovely, and this is something that I think people could get into. I like dark classical music, but this isn't dark, but it's not just pretty. It's substantial. It's really nice, and I actually have. I think this is originally recorded in the early '70s. I have 2 versions of the same album with a different cover. So this has come out, and this is strictly on CD. It's probably come out with a different cover on LP as well. But I highly recommend this if you like classical piano music at all, and it's not overly busy. This is really nice. I can only speak for this particular recording. This is the only version of these pieces I know. But these particular Deutsche Grammophon looks like it was from '74 with Emil Giles on piano. Like that. Sometimes I buy compilations. Actually, probably most of my classical music is compilations until I find a particular composer that I like a lot. So you get something like this, which is kind of put together for a lot of people that probably are my friends that would appreciate this. Midnight Adagios. So it's all classical music, but it's the slower, calmer stuff. So, and fairly well known, all the composers are well known, Mozart, Beethoven, Elgar, Dvorak, Beethoven, Bach, Vivaldi. There's, composer-wise, Debussy, of course. Composer-wise, Rodrigo, the Concerto, of course, D'Aranjuez, Shostakovich even. Not a big surprise in terms of being any composers that you haven't heard of, and probably haven't heard some of their music. But you're not going to know all the pieces, and I didn't know all pieces. Some are fairly obvious, and some are not. But this is a particularly good compilation because it stays in the low-key mode. So if you're looking for that kind of, and it's 2 discs, there's a lot of stuff on here. So that was pretty good. When the hell did that come out? 2003? I don't know. Could this could potentially still be in print? So I have a lot of things like that. I was actually in the RCA record club when that was still around, the mail order record club. And for some reason, instead of getting into I was in the jazz club, which the selection of the month would always be jazz. But they were mostly focusing on smooth jazz, which I totally wasn't into at all at the time. So for some reason, I chose instead the classical department. So I'd get the classical catalog instead of the pop music catalog or the jazz catalog. And this is before the internet. So I got in the classical club, and anything that looked interesting that they featured, they would write enough about that you could get an idea of what the music sounded like. Of course, this is before you could sample all this stuff. And if it sounded good, I'd say, you know what, I'm gonna just go for it. So I got stuff like Bartók. I'd only heard of Bartók. Bartók is, at least on these pieces, which were really good, music for strings, percussion, and celesta, which is a real great combination, I think. I was curious to hear that. There's not a lot of percussion, there's not a lot of celesta in a lot of classical music. But the music itself is not avant-garde. It's not way out there. It's not difficult. Bartók, I guess some of his music is that way, but not all of it. It may take a bit of concentration and a bit of playing it a few times to get it. But it's worth the investment in terms of time and appreciation. So, and this stuff definitely has atmosphere to it, no doubt about it. And then there's some stuff that's on the farther out, darker kind of side of things, like Schoenberg. A lot of people that try out Schoenberg don't like Schoenberg because he can get pretty avant-garde. But damn, I love this album. And this is one of the albums I probably show this one around Halloween time because it's got a Halloween vibe to it. It's one of the few albums I have of classical music that don't have any direct association with Halloween, even the way it's packaged, as they do with some classical music that's got a darker subject matter or something. But it's a bit, I wouldn't say it's out there, but it's a bit dark. It's a bit thick and complex. So you have to be in the mood for it. But, man, I dig it. But you have to be in the mood for it. But it's orchestral music. There's a lot going on. And it's probably not the best background music to play at a dinner party. And then I go to, some, very, I guess, mainstream type classical music things that you could play for background music in the dinner party music. Ravel, complete music for solo piano. I think I talked about these Vox Box before. They're not around anymore, but they used to throw together these really nice double CD sets. This is in the days when they used to have the fat CD boxes. This is when CDs first came out in the late 80s. And generally, these were all old albums that were being released on CD. They generally stick 3 complete albums on 2 CDs is what they would do. So you'd get your money's worth. So each CD, one is 65 minutes, one's 70 minutes. And I know others that I have are comprised entirely of all older albums that had been released on vinyl back in the day. Almost all of them contain 3 vinyl albums worth of material. And I have one Ravel. I have this one for solo piano, and I have a Ravel orchestral music as well. And his stuff is almost like classical music on training wheels. It's pretty easy to get into. It's a good entryway into classical music is Ravel's stuff in general, whether it's piano or whether it's, I think, orchestral music. A lot of it's really pretty, but not unsubstantial, but it's not difficult to get into. Same with Satie, with the king of probably classical mellow piano music. So here's another one. Easy to get into, mostly pretty mellow most of the time. Nice mood, nice atmosphere. Great cover that kind of conveys the vibe of the music, which is why I bought a lot of these. And really, after I had, hundreds and hundreds of jazz things, I was like, well, Jesus, I really should have some classical stuff in my collection, especially somebody like a Satie, who borders on a mellow, I don't know, like cross between new age and jazz at times almost. Not that there's anything real jazzy about it, but just in terms of the technical aspects of the music, the changes and the complexity of the music. But it's very easy stuff to get into. And another great Vox Box set. I wish this company was still around. Two CDs of 74 minutes each on this one. Another big fat duo box. It took them a few years to figure out to put in those little flip doors that you could store a CD on each side. So you had these big fat things, just for 2 CDs. And see, in my mind, a lot of traditional ethnic music falls into classical music, and some people would disagree with that. They would just consider it to be strictly ethnic music. But for me, like the cultural stuff, I actually have a folding table up here because it's better than putting the stuff back there and having to reach around for it. So I brought out my little folding table. But to me, traditional ethnic music, not modern stuff that's, made and built with synthesizers and, updated versions of things, but rather the original instrumentation and the original music is also a type of classical music. And there's some composers that work in crosses between traditional music and classical music. So here's Bright Sheng, who's somebody I didn't know, but I have about 3 or 4 albums by of pieces. That mixes, I guess it's Chinese, must be Chinese music, or the flavor of Chinese music in an orchestral setting, and just interesting small settings sometimes for soprano voice, viola, and piano. But I've got I don't know, like 3 or 4 albums of Bright Sheng music that's just really lovely stuff. And going all over the world, nothing is complete without at least one gamelan album. This was a Tower Records buy. I can tell by the sticker I put on there. So gamelan music from Bali, which gamelan are those metallic, very odd sounding, almost sounds out of tune, tuned metallic bells. So all the music is played on those tuned little individually sized metallic bells. It's very foreign, very strange sounding. If you pay attention to soundtrack music, you've probably heard music like that when people go overseas to like Indonesia and Bali and places like that. In the soundtrack of the music, they, if people making the film know what they're doing, they try to get a little bit of a flavor of the traditional cultural music. And I forget right now. I think these bells, these metallically tuned things, are they brass? I forget what metal they're made out of. Very odd sounding, but I think if you sit and listen to it for a while, your ears will adjust to it, and it can be really lovely and intense music. But I think if you have a collection of classical music, you have to have some of that in there. Some stuff like gamelan and ethnic stuff. And here's one I have of music of temple bells, which is similar but not quite as intense and not quite as odd sounding as the gamelan orchestra. The gamelan, all the metal instruments. Then I have, of course, just things that I just randomly buy. I'm a big fan of traditional Japanese and Chinese music. So I have an album, this album, which is essentially a compilation album, focuses on the pipa, which is one of the stringed instruments of China, which I love. That's the featured instrument there. Here is Japanese traditional music, and they played the bamboo flutes and the kotos and the various stringed instruments of Japan, which are lovely sounds. I think it would be easy for people to get into this kind of stuff because it's so pretty, even though the instruments themselves are not necessarily the kind of thing you're used to listening to. Here's another Chinese pipa music. That's what the pipa looks like, or pipa looks like. Stringed instrument, played not so much with chords. A lot of it's pretty much just single notes, and every once in a while you get a waver of a chord in there. Pretty intense, pretty cool sounding thing, if you like that, which I do. Here's one, the None Such Explorer series, which I actually have on vinyl too. Traditional instrumental music of Japan. This is a lot more mainstream and a lot more of a good introduction. It almost is like this was made to be an introduction to traditional Japanese music with the traditional instruments, the flutes and the kotos and the stringed instruments and that kind of thing. And when the CD era came around, they just reissued it straight as it was right off the album. When did the album come out? I'm not sure. CD came out in the 90s, but I'm thinking the album came out probably in the 70s. And I just grabbed these. I didn't even know what I was grabbing. Another one. I guess this is Chinese. I guess this is Chinese. Gee, I didn't realize that there's not much information on the CD itself, so this might not have been the best one to grab. But you can see a lot of the Chinese instruments and some of the Japanese instruments do have a similarity. The stringed instruments in terms of the way that they're set up and the way that they're played, and a lot of them the way they sound even. Just different pitches, like soprano and tenor versions of different stringed instruments. But to be all that, ethnic music is classical music, and it's the same thing. You know, the subject matter is all binds in together here. This is all music that I bought because I was in the mood to listen to and create an atmosphere and let the music do it. Kind of music that just kind of flows over you rather than just sit there and analyze everything that's being played. Now, with some of these albums, especially with the small ensembles on the Chinese and Japanese music, when you listen to it and somebody's playing a stringed instrument and I play guitar, sometimes I do get a little caught up in the technique behind it, listening to, oh, it must be hard to play that, or, oh, how did he do that kind of thing. I try to get away from that when I'm listening to music, but sometimes it's difficult. But my main purpose for buying these albums and listening to these albums, which I still do today, I mean, that hasn't changed, even though all these albums go back to the late 80s and the 90s when I bought most of these. But the idea behind it continues, and that's buying this kind of music to kind of create an atmosphere in your space. And hopefully one of peace and calm, but specifically just a nice world to live in, and something that you don't overly analyze. And obviously it's not music you're going to dance to or tap your feet to or rock out to, but rather it's music to kind of experience in the best way possible. So I might do another video showing my quote-unquote atmosphere music. I don't know. I might just end up doing videos of what I've been listening to and what I've been working on for myself musically. I don't know. But I thought I'd come on, yak a little bit, show some of the albums I've been thinking about. I'm going to probably be spinning all of these now that I've spoken about them and I kind of got the flavor and the idea in mind that I want to hear these again. And hope everybody's doing well. I'm sorry for going so long once again. I shouldn't have. I chose the subject matter because I thought I'd keep it short. So sorry for not keeping it short. But I'll be back at some point. Hope everybody's doing well. I appreciate you watching my videos, and take care, everybody.